Oh, hi, and see you there. I'm Dax, and this is What's Under the Bed, where I interview filmmakers, actors, and guests about horror movies. Mine?
Subscribe.
Oh, subscribe and ring that bell. So, I'm going to speak to the audience real quick to explain who you are. Patrick Bryce is a director, writer, and actor of several great horror films and comedies. He made his directorial debut with the found footage psychological horror film called Creep. Creep was well received and has developed cult status. Patrick returned with Creep 2 in 2017 and was again met with love from audiences and critics alike. His second feature as a writer and director was The Overnight, a comedy starring Adam Scott and Jason Schwartzman. He will talk about we'll talk about the penises later. He directed the black comedy Corporate Animals, and just last year he released a stylized slasher film for Netflix called There's Someone Inside Your House. Patrick, it's nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thanks for having me.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern California in a little town called Grass Valley, which was it's an old gold mining town that's like in the middle of the woods. And so it's like, I think the population's like 9,000 people or something like that. So it was perfect for going on to make horror films for sure.
So what was your childhood like? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, well, I was an only child, and I was always interested in movies and the arts, and luckily my parents were super supportive of me pursuing whatever I wanted to do. And so they would take me to whatever movies I would ask them to go see and buy me books. And I read lots of comics and a lot of novels growing up. And it was a big part of my life, and it was a big source of sort of like nurturing my creative self, and something I was really grateful for, because I think when you're an only kid, it can be lonely, and having the access to that kind of stuff really opened up the world for me. And it was also sort of strange because I wasn't like a lot of kids that I went to school with, and I had a very small set of friends. I think because of that, I wasn't interested in sports. I wasn't one of the popular kids, and so luckily I was able to sort of like find my group of friends that I'm still friends with now. I'm still friends with my closest friends that I met when I was in middle school back in that small town. And yeah, it was definitely a unique upbringing. I also grew up on 7 acres of forest, like in the middle of the woods, basically, with my mom and dad. And so, it was always a scary house for sleepovers for friends of mine. I was completely used to it, but it was a house with a bunch of windows out in the middle of the woods. And so I think if you weren't used to that, it could be something where, it could be like the setting for a horror movie or something. But, for me, it was just sort of something I guess I just kind of took it for granted because it was the way it was.
So before the influence of movies, what scared you the most? Did you have the fear of the dark or the monster under the bed? What was it?
That's a good question. I would say like some of my, from what I can remember, some of my earliest fears were super existential and were like kind of less immediate, you know what I mean? And they were more like fears about ideas of things. For example, I have this memory of freaking out when my parents described to me what was happening with the first Gulf War, and when I first learned what war was, uh, and that was like, the concept of that was something that was so like out of this world to me. And when that was actually explained to me, it was like so overwhelming that I had nightmares about it. Um, and it really affected me in a big way. Also, earthquakes were very scary to me. I don't know if this is just because of, like, growing up in California, but I remember being terrified of earthquakes, and I remember going to visit San Francisco in the early 90s, shortly after the big earthquake that they had in 1989, and being terrified the entire time that I was there, even though we were just doing normal stuff like going to Fisherman's Wharf and seeing the Golden Gate Bridge and whatever. I was convinced that at any moment an earthquake could happen. I was 8 years old, by the way, at the time, so you know, a heavy burden for an 8-year-old to have, for sure. But yeah, I would say that's where, like, that's probably where, like, most of my fears came from. And then I think once I left high school and moved to the Bay Area, I lived in the Bay Area for 10 years, you know, my fears sort of became more like self-protective about, like, living in a big city and, like, wanting to make sure that, like, you know, I wasn't robbed or something like that. Like, my fears have never really gone to, like, the fantastical or you know, ghosts or anything like that for whatever reason. I think I've always been comfortable with um that kind of stuff, and I think part of it just comes from, you know, living in the middle of the woods and being comfortable with being in the dark, being in the middle of the woods at nighttime, listening to the sounds of the forest. Like, all that stuff is sort of baked into my uh, DNA a little bit.
So, was there a children's story or fairy tale that scared you when you were a child?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny because you hear, you know, you hear all these fairy tales now, you know, as you get older. And I have 2 kids, and so we do read fairy tales sometimes, and I'm always surprised how dark a lot of them are, especially the old, you know, the Grimm's fairy tales and stuff like that. But yeah, Hansel and Gretel was very scary to me. And I don't know if you've seen the movie that came out recently, uh, 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 by Oz Perkins. It's
I
really
was
good and very scary.
I was watching the trailer and I totally forgot about it. I really wanted to see that movie. I heard it's
It's
really
really
good.
good. Yeah, it kind of came and went, but he's a really great director, and was able to do something really special with not a lot of money, to make that movie. And I think there's just something visceral and inherently will always be terrifying about that story, and about, you know, the idea of, like, wandering into the woods and meeting a witch who may seem nice but really wants to eat you.
Um, did you ever make your own movies when you were a kid? And if so, do any copies of the movies still exist?
Yeah, they do. They're on high eight video. Do you know what high eight is? That format?
Probably have. You're gonna have to
It's like
remind me.
one of the earlier, it's like one of the earlier forms of video. It's before HD, before mini DV came out, and then, you know, HD, and then everything was on, you know, memory cards or whatever. But this was, it's still on these tapes. But yeah, you know, I've wanted to make movies since I was like 12 or 13 years old. I think that was when I really decided that that's what I wanted to do and got super obsessed with it. And I think, you know, I tried to make little films with my friends. They were mostly silly, and they were mostly just, like, for our own amusement, you know. And I am terrified to go back and look at them and see what what's actually on them, because I'm sure there's, you know, because it's unfiltered 12 or 13-year-olds just being ridiculous. So I'm sure there's a lot of stuff on there that I'd be embarrassed about. But one of these days I'll pull them out. I also don't have a high 8 camera to play the tapes on, so, you know, maybe I'll digitize them at some point so they're not lost. But um, it was a fun activity when I was a kid, and was also, like, you know, a way to, like, scratch that creative itch and see what it feels like to, you know, think about telling a story and think about what it means for one shot to move into the other, and how that all works, and just, starting to like, it was the seeds of narrative storytelling, basically. Making those little movies. But they're not great, I'll tell you that.
So my parents are divorced, and I switch between staying with my mother and father every week. Your parents split when you were 12. How did life change for you after their divorce?
Yeah. I think at the time I was old enough to know that it wasn't working having everyone be together in the same house, and so I was kind of relieved, because I felt like my parents were unhappy. And then once they did divorce, I think I saw them, able to move on with their lives a little bit and become more happy. So like, I was happy for them. For me though, I think it was really tough, because I did 1 week on, 1 week off. So I'd be with my mom for a week and then with my dad for a week. And I think doing that at that age, when I couldn't drive, so I was having to take the bus to school. And uh, I remember I would pack all my clothes. And so I would, on Fridays when I'd be going from one house or the other, I would bring all my clothes, because I'd like have all my favorite clothes that I'd want to wear, and so it felt like a little bit like I was upending my life every week, and it felt like kind of hard to like settle in a little bit. So that was tough. And uh I think everyone's story and everyone's journey is different, but for me it was it was good in that I knew I was happy my parents were able to move on, but it was also hard in that uh I was never able to really like get settled in my own zone, and I actually ended up dropping out of high school my junior year. And it wasn't because of that. I think it was mostly because I also didn't like high school, and I wasn't getting um uh sort of fulfilled by school in the way that I could have and should have been. And so I think, luckily my parents were very supportive of me taking the GED and starting college early. And that's what I did. I ended up moving to San Francisco when I just turned 17, and started taking junior college classes. And at the time it was very lonely and hard, because I was like a 17-year-old amongst a bunch of 20 somethings, and in a big city alone. But I learned a lot of skills that ended up being things that I draw upon even now at this point in my life, and it was good, because I don't think traditional school is for everybody. I think there's a different path for everyone, and I think part of the goal is just finding that.
So, what were you like as a teenager?
Uh, as a teenager, I think I was a bit of an old soul. It was harder for me to connect with my friends, because a lot of the stuff that I was into and things I was reading would either, it just weren't what my friends were being exposed to. I did have common things that I liked as well as my friends, but I think not only having the experience of, uh, you know, pretty much half of my teenage years living on my own out in the world, that already separated my experience and made it something where it was hard for me to relate to other kids my age, because I wasn't dealing with the same things that they were dealing with, and like I was like the night that all my friends were at their senior prom, I was working the graveyard shift as a valet, and I remember getting texts from my friends. Well, I guess is I calls, I guess, because it's pre-texting, but like knowing that they were like going out to parties and stuff, and I wasn't doing that. I was busy working because I had to work to pay the rent as an 18-year-old. So, as a teenager, I definitely felt like lonely, but I am grateful for that loneliness, because I think as an adult, you have to feel lonely. a lot of the time, and those feelings inevitably come up in your life. And I think for them to come up at a younger age and learn some like coping mechanisms for that stuff at a younger age made it so when I had to deal with that as a more fully formed adult, it was like less traumatizing or disrupting, if you know what I mean. Like I had that skill set to draw on, you know.
So how so with that, how much of your high school experience forms who you are?
I mean, I think in my particular case, uh, my my high school experience, part of my high school experience was leaving high school early, and so that 100% helped form who I am, you know. Um, and there's a lot of stuff that happened at that time, you know, during that time, like you said, when I was 12 and 13, my parents got divorced, but that didn't like define me. That just was like something that you know, that was like just something that happened that we had to sort of deal with and go through. But I would say leaving school early did help define me in that I had to mature at a faster rate than normal. And it wasn't like when I did that, I was like ready, fully emotionally ready to experience all the things that I was going to experience leaving high school. You know, like I didn't, there was a lot of unknowns, but I think at least in terms of like what my parents saw in me, you know, and I had a good relationship with both of my parents, and there was a lot of trust and understanding there. And I think there had to be in order for them to say, yeah, we think this is, you know, this is something that you this is a choice you could make, and I could see you thriving and doing this, you know. That said, it's like you know, like life is an imperfect process, and you're always learning something, and especially when it comes to the hard stuff, you know. And if you can get through the hard stuff and look back at it and say, okay, well, if I'm confronted with that again, here's how I would react differently. Here's what worked. Here's what didn't work. Like if you're in a space that you're able to do that, then, you know, I think that's the key to sort of like going through life and trying to find your way and find your happiness. And I think being alone a lot and being alone with your thoughts and being lonely is actually good when it comes to being able to like know yourself a little bit more. And if you're really able to like, you know, sort of you know, look at these experiences and say like was I happy doing that when I made that choice? Did that choice work for me, or did that choice lead to something that I didn't want to happen? You know, whether it was like, I don't know, you know, hanging out with someone that maybe you thought was going to be cool and was going to be a fulfilling relationship, and then it, you know, that person made you feel bad, you know, and like knowing that like, oh, that doesn't feel good, or I didn't like myself when I was hanging out with this person, so I'm probably not going to do that again, you know, or like I'm going to look for these signs in future relationships and try to avoid them, you know. And yeah, it's a crazy time, and it's a lot of pressure, I think, to have on someone during that age, because like when you're a teenager, you know, it's everything's new, and you're learning so much every day, and you're drawing conclusions from all this stuff too. Like, you know, there's this like time in your life where you're like realizing all these things that had maybe been instincts or inclinations, are like, oh, this means that, and that means this. And so like I think there's a you know, there's an inclination to like say like, oh, well, this is how it's going to be for the rest of my life, or, you know, this is I know everything now, you know. And I think, you know, and I had that moment in my life and that time in my life for sure, but then I of course that got upended as everything does. And I think part of the key to like being happy and making sure that you're growing and learning always is to approach every day as a learning experience, and as I don't know how to do this, but I'm going to try. I'm going to follow my heart and my instincts, and that's the best I can do, and that's sort of the way I stumbled into living through those years, and it was hard for sure. I would say it was the hardest time in my life, but I'm also completely grateful and wouldn't change any of it, uh, because of where it's led me to. And like now I feel like I'm a better friend, family member, filmmaker, father, all that stuff, because I went through all that tough stuff, and I dealt with that from an early age on my own.
You said that you were 12 to 13 when you wanted to become a filmmaker, and you said that your parents were really supportive of you. Were your parents still supportive of your decision to become a filmmaker?
Yeah, I mean, they helped pay for junior college while I was in living on my own at first, and they would give me a little bit of money once a month, to like pay for classes, and because I was living on my own. And they did that until I went through a period where I actually left school and I stopped taking classes. And part of that was because I got a job working as a personal assistant to a writer and producer. And this is my first job as a working in film. It was on a movie called Pig Hunt, and I was the assistant to the writer and producer, financier of that movie. And this was in San Francisco, and it's a horror movie. It's a super wild movie, and it was great because it was like I basically got to work on a film for 2 years from start to finish and see the entirety of the process, and help obviously in like work. And it was great because I had a job, but it was also like a chance to sort of experience all aspects of making a movie, putting it together, production, post-production, trying to sell it as as an independent film. And it demystified a lot of that for me, because I think you have an idea of what making a movie's like, or what it could be like, and then there's the actual practical act of making it, right? And so I did that, and it was great. I learned a lot, but I also realized in that time that I didn't want to be an assistant my whole life. I wanted to do this on myself. And so while I was doing that job, I secretly, unbeknownst to my boss at the time, applied to go to film school, to finish my film school. And I was like 24 at the time that I applied, and so I was applying to go back to finish my undergrad at, and I got into this school called Cal Arts down in Los Angeles, and that's why I moved to LA, was to go to Cal Arts. And at the time, I was paying for it myself. I'd saved up enough money to pay for my own school, and the whole time my parents were very supportive and encouraging, and it was nice, because I don't think they fully realized what a sort of gamble it was to for me to pursue filmmaking, because it is a really tough industry. It's an industry that's constantly changing. It's so cool that you have both those posters up there, by the way. Thanks for doing that. That's so sweet. But looking at those two posters is funny for me, because the first movie, Creep, was a movie that we made completely on our own with a video camera, just me and Mark Duplass. And then through this crazy journey of showing it to Jason Blum at Blumhouse, and then going back and doing all these reshoots and stuff, and kind of crafting it into a movie, it eventually came out on Netflix, and I don't know if that model could exist now, of making a movie on your own and selling it to Netflix, because Netflix is a very different company. And the movie on the other shoulder, There's Someone Inside Your House, is a movie that Netflix was essentially the studio for. And Netflix, spent millions of dollars to make and was a much bigger movie and was much more in line with sort of like how they make stuff now. And so, you know, I got very lucky to have made a film on my own that checked enough boxes for a corporation like Netflix to look at and say, oh, we know how to sell this, and we know this, you know, we know how to make this, you know, work as a movie and put it out. And so, you know, I do, like, I'm grateful for my parents' support. And I'm also, it also like makes me nervous because it's just like, it's just such a, the industry is just always changing and nobody really knows anything at the end of the day. You know, nobody really knows or can predict the future in terms of what's going to work and not work. And I think you're constantly rolling the dice, and that's why there's a lot of repetition, you know, and why, you know, when people come up with something that works, they'll try to repeat that again. That's why, you know, the Marvel universe exists, because it's, you know, those movies are phenomenally successful, and there's so many there's just so much to draw from and pull from in terms of inspiration to make more movies and stuff like that. So you know, it's yeah. But yeah, going back to what you're saying, yeah, my parents were super supportive, but also, like, you know, knowing what I know now, it makes me nervous on their behalf, because it's just such a wild sort of pool to jump into.
You've said horror movies weren't necessarily what you watched growing up, and you saw yourself making more comedies. What are some comedies that stand the test of time?
I mean, for me, a lot of early like gag comedies were really what got me as a kid, like Airplane and The Naked Gun and Top Secret, and these kind of movies that were just like one visual gag or one pun joke after another. It's like rapid fire. Like, those are the movies that I really sort of like uh 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 was obsessed with as a kid. And those were the movies that I think I you know, I didn't watch those movies and necessarily say I want to make movies just like this, but I knew the feeling that it invoked, and I knew the joy that I was going to experience when I put one of those movies on, and that was something that really spoke to me. You know, one of the reasons I think I became so obsessed with filmmaking and enjoyed movies so much is watching movies with my dad. And my mom was a therapist, and she worked nights on every Wednesday night. And so my dad and I would watch a movie every Wednesday night together. Every Wednesday night we would rent a movie, and it was something I looked forward to all week. And it was a tradition. And because of that, I was exposed to so many different movies, you know, and this was at the time where you'd go to the video store and rent VHS tapes, you know. And that was really my sort of like my my entree into that whole world. Like, I know a lot of people went to the theater a lot as a kid, and that was like going to the actual movie theater was a big part of their upbringing in that way. And for me, it was really, I mean, I would go to the theater sometimes, but I was watching the most movies I was watching on VHS and watching them at home. And so it was a lot of stuff that both my dad and I would like, you know, like it was a lot of, I mean, he sort of like humored me sometimes, and we would watch stuff that was like more like geared toward kids maybe, but for the most part, we were watching stuff that my dad liked that I would like too, maybe. You know, and so that's why we watched a lot of stuff like that. A lot of 80s comedies, a lot of Dan Aykroyd, a lot of Bill Murray, a lot of that stuff.
Do you think comedies age better than horror movies, or the other way around?
I think the other way around for sure. You know, I think I think it's rare when a comedy translates over generations, you know. And I think an effective horror movie, it might change sort of like what's actually scary or not, you know what I mean? Like I think audiences are more and more sophisticated now and are more attuned to I think like, I think, because I made this movie Creep, which relied on documentary aesthetic and it has the look and feel of a documentary. It's supposed to be a fake documentary, and I think people are more sort of attuned to like what that looks and feels like, and what, a lot of what Creep is playing with what's real and what's not, right? And part of the trick and joy of that movie is you have to give into the conceit that what you're watching is real. And if you kind of do that, and if you play that game and you go along on that roller coaster ride, you're going to have a good time. But if you approach every, found footage movie or Creep or Paranormal Activity or whatever saying like, this isn't real, like, duh, it's not real, but it, you sort of, you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit in order to like enjoy it and sort of experience it for what it is. And so, I think that's a great question. And I think even older, even like the Universal monster movies, even like stuff that came out in like the 60s and 70s, especially a lot of stuff that came out in the 60s, or the 70s, it's like super wild when it comes to horror, holds up on its own. And, there will be moments that you're like, oh, that feels cheesy or whatever, but it's still scary and there's still unsettling stuff. And I think, I fully think, a good horror movie is going to stand the test of time over a comedy. Because I think, what's funny is like, so it is constantly evolving, but what you're tapping into with a horror movie and what's actually scary is stuff that like, I think human beings have been experiencing and reckoning with for thousands and thousands of years, yeah.
You said David Lynch is your biggest influence as an artist. What do I need to know before watching David Lynch movies?
Don't expect anything to make sense. Don't walk into any of those movies saying this is going to make any sense at all. Because what he's tapping into as an artist is your subconscious and his own subconscious, really. And there's a really amazing purity to it, because a lot of it's very innocent, but a lot of it's very dark at the same time too. But there's also an honesty in that I think I appreciated, and I think spoke to me growing up, because I think all that stuff was swirling around in my head. And it was nice to see an artist take that and articulate it in like, not just his filmmaking, but his painting and his music. And I think for me too, what was so inspirational for, learning about him as an artist after watching a few of his movies was the idea of the practicing artist, and the idea that you can filter all that stuff into any medium, and if you want to, and if that's something you're interested in. And so for me, it was like really helpful and inspirational to see someone take all this stuff that I don't think I could even knew how to talk about or articulate, whether it's dreams, whether it's a flash of light that you think you saw out of the corner of your eye, or the experience of deja vu, or an image, a single image that's stuck with you that you maybe saw in a magazine for some reason and you don't know why, like all that stuff. Like he's able to sort of like take that and put that into his films and in his art. And it was, I don't know, it just was very freeing to see that. And then to have other sort of filmmakers do the same thing that he did later on and know what that felt like, and be able to draw on what that felt like when I first got really obsessed and interested in his movies, I think was really helpful. I had a teacher at CalArts when I was there named Tom Anderson, who made this really amazing documentary called Los Angeles Plays Itself, all about Los Angeles and how it's been depicted in movies. And it's a really good movie to watch as like a history of filmmaking, and you realize so much has been set in Los Angeles, and it's about why Los Angeles and how and what it means to shoot in one neighborhood or the other. And the first thing he said to me when I got to school was, the great thing about filmmaking is you're allowed to be interested in everything. like it's an avenue in which to pursue any interest you may have in the outside world, whether it's you're interested in making a horror movie or a comedy or whatever, blah blah blah. But even if you want to make a documentary about any subject, you can do it. You can find a way to do it, and filmmaking can be your tool and your medium at which you explore sort of the world. And that was also something that was very important for me to hear early on, and for me to hear when I went back to school, which was really me just going back to look inward and be like, why do I want to make movies, and what kind of movies do I want to make if I'm given the chance to do that?
Why is the movie Fire Walk with Me so special to you?
I think it hit me on an emotional level. It's still a profoundly affecting. It's a really intense movie. I wouldn't start with that movie if you have you watched any David Lynch films?
I've seen the one with, why am I blanking out of the name now? The one with Nick Cage. I forgot what it's called. I'm blanking out on any names. Yeah, Wild at Heart. Yeah, I've seen that one.
Okay, that's a pretty wild one. That's jumping into the deep end for sure. I think, Fire Walk with Me, I was a big fan of the TV series, and I think, that film was initially not well received because it was quite different, much darker than the TV series. And I think the central performance in that movie of Sheryl Lee is just so affecting and moving for me. And then I also loved just that there's a 10-minute opening sequence in that movie that is completely its own thing, its own tone. It was something that I'd never seen before. And I don't know, it was just kind of exhilarating for me to watch at a young age. I ended up giving a class report on David Lynch in 8th grade. So I was I guess I was 12 or something, or 12 or 13. And I showed the first 10 minutes of that movie to my class. And I think no one knew what I was talking about. It was just what is going on here? But yeah, I think it's, and I think it also it works as this sort of emotional character study, that movie. And I think it also works completely as a horror movie. And it was something where I never really thought of it as a horror movie until later on, when I started making them, and was oh yeah, this movie that I think had been really central to sort of me getting excited about filmmaking happened to be a horror movie. Because I didn't set out to be a horror director. It kind of came to me in the projects that have, in Creep being turned into one, and realizing that I did have these inclinations. But I think later on, sort of rewatching that movie and thinking about that movie made me realize that it had kind of been in me for a long time.
I'd like to read you a line from a David Lynch movie to see if you can guess the title. If I were to, for example, if I were to say I am not an animal, you would answer Elephant Man.
Mm-hmm.
So three questions. First, not three lines. First one is, this is a snakeskin jacket, and for me, it's a symbol of my individuality and my belief in personal freedom.
That would be Wild at Heart.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. The second one is, I got the pool, she got the pool, man.
Mulholland Drive.
Yep. And the third one is, if I had a nickel for every cigarette your mom smoked, I'd be dead.
Oh my God. I've got dad brain right now. Blue Velvet?
No, it's Fire Walk with Me.
Oh my God.
It is the movie. It's the one movie. It's the one movie.
They all just roll into each other at this point.
So we've been talking about how you went to film school. And do you think film school is necessary to become a filmmaker?
I don't think it's necessary at all. I think it's helpful. I don't think it's a, like ultimate prerequisite for being a filmmaker at all. Like, I think, there's many different paths into this job, which is part of what's nice about it. Like, it depends on what you want to do as well. Like, I think it's probably helpful to go to film school if, say, you want to be a producer, and putting a production together and running a production is part of what you want to do. I think it's very helpful to go to film school, and there are certain film schools that are much more conducive to that, like straightforward, here's how the industry works, and here's how sets function when you're in production, and here's what it's like to work on a movie throughout the course of making it. Same with directing, I guess. But I had friends at CalArts. Like, I had a friend that I went to school with who dropped out 6 months into being at school, and that was partly because she wanted to be a grip. Like, she wanted to work in grip electrical department and work on lighting. She eventually became a gaffer, and her whole role was controlling the lighting and working with the cinematographer in terms of making the lighting work on movies. And she had been getting enough gigs that it just didn't make sense for her to be in school. And it's a job that really didn't require that. It's not like anyone is looking at your film degree. It's more of a apprenticeship based model where you're learning from someone older than you, and you're learning on the job. And so if you're wanting to do something like that, it doesn't mean you need to go to film school. For me, it was extraordinarily important. And that was just because I had worked on this movie. I knew I wanted to make movies. I didn't know why. But I also needed a place to go be inspired and be challenged. And so for me, the 2 years that I was at film school were about that. And were about me sort of just watching a ton of movies, reading a lot, not as much making stuff. I didn't make a lot of stuff while I was in film school. I made a documentary at the very end of as my thesis movie while I was there. But other than that, I really didn't make anything. I helped friends out on projects and stuff. But for me, it was really just a chance to try to figure out why I wanted to do this. And that school was really good for that. Like, that school wasn't the best school as here's exactly what you need to do to work and go out in the world as a filmmaker school. That school is more of this is what you're inclined to do, or this is what you're interested in. Well, here's some avenues in which to explore that. There are definitely schools that are much more industry focused. And I have friends that went there to those schools and have worked with a lot of people that went to those schools. And I'm grateful for the knowledge that those people have received, because it's also helped me because I've essentially had to kind of learn on the job too. Like, a lot of my job has been me being put in positions that I wasn't necessarily qualified for, and having to rely on instinct to get through that, whether it was making a movie or working for someone else or whatever. And I think it was good because I went through film school, and that helped me have the confidence to go into new situations and learn on the job. And I think as a director, because there's so many people asking you questions every day, like, part of your job is filtering all these questions that you're getting and making decisions, and not making decisions and having that you don't really have the answer for, and could be the wrong answer. Like whether it's like the color of someone's shirt that they're going to wear in a scene. You know, I still have regrets for a lot of decisions that I made while I was on set of thinking, oh, I have enough takes of this one moment, you know, when I really didn't have it. Or, you know, someone like Jason Schwartzman's shirt is wrinkled in the overnight. And like, that's something that's always going to bother me, you know, even though it's fine, no one else cares, you know, but it was something that it was a decision that I made or something that I overlooked and is now baked into that movie until the end of time. And so, you know, I think it's at the varying stages of making a movie, whether it's you by yourself writing it or in pre-production where you're starting to have conversations with everyone or in the middle of production, I think you're kind of having to like become a different person or rely on different instincts at each of those stages. You know what I mean? I think luckily during that writing time, you have the benefit of time, but it also can be a burden as well because, you know, you could be toiling all day over a decision or a scene or something that once you get on set, you realize, oh, this doesn't work at all, you know, and I have to change it. And that's inevitable. Change is inevitable and nothing is going to be perfect. And that's the thing that I think has been the most helpful is like knowing that and not letting that be something that like stifles me, you know, and letting that be part of the fun and letting that inevitable change be part of the process because it will be there whether you like it or not.
So you mentioned earlier in this interview that you and Mark Duplass created the film Creep. It premiered at the South by Southwest Film Festival and received great reviews. What was the first screening at South by Southwest like for you?
The first screening of Creep was super nerve-wracking for me. And I think partly it was because I had made this movie that didn't look or feel like any other horror movie that was out at the time. And so I felt insecure because I didn't know if people were going to like it or not. And also I knew horror fans are particularly sort of, I don't know. I would, you know, serious fan base when it comes to like, you know, if you're a serious horror fan, you're going to watch everything. And I was worried because our film, I felt like it wasn't checking a lot of boxes that maybe horror fans were wanting. Like it was more about this psychological tension that was developing between these two characters and less about like set pieces or kills or whatever, you know, the things that we sort of got to play with and there's someone inside your house, you know, the more traditional aspects of horror movies. And so for me, I was just very nervous going into it. I thought everyone was going to hate it. And luckily, and I think part of it was showing the movie in Austin, which has traditionally been a great place for me in terms of like screening films because audiences are super open. I've just found audiences to be super open there and cool. It went great, and it was a fabulous screening, and the movie got good reviews coming out of it, and it was a super reassuring experience having been able to have the movie premiere there. But you know, it was my first movie. It's a movie that I don't think I ever thought I would be making a movie like that, and so I just did. There was a lot of unknowns associated with it, and so you know, it was a nerve-wracking experience for the most part, with like a small amount of relief at the end. And it's so funny because, you know, screening your movie at a festival, I think a lot of people assume that it's just a victory lap, or it's like, you know, it's like that's the thing that you're working towards, and that's the thing that's you're gonna get to that's fun and good. And I've only found that part of the experience to be, I mean, it's good for sure, and it's exhilarating, but it's also exhausting and part of the job, you know, promoting your movie and talking about your movie. It's like it is work, and it is energy, you know, and it is like you're having to access a different part of your brain than you are when you're actually like making a movie, you know.
So, what was the origin of Peachfuzz?
It was me and Mark Duplass trying to make ourselves laugh and make each other scared. And I think it was Mark actually that came up with the title first. And he's like, I don't know why. I just think this movie should be called Peachfuzz. And then we sort of backtracked from there. And then that's where the wolf came from, and the story, and the idea of this either alter ego or persona or imaginary friend. Like I also like that it's not really defined in the movie, nor is it necessarily defined in the second movie. It's just kind of there and part of this character. um I liked it that it's funny, but also in this context deeply scary, you know. And I think that really uh helped hammer down the specific tone of that movie, right? Because it's a horror movie that hopefully you're laughing at a lot, you know. And but it's not I wouldn't call it a horror comedy still, you know. um you know, we wanted it to be funny, but we also wanted we wanted that laughter to be nervous laughter, right?
Yeah. Um, where is Peachfuzz now? Where is
uh you mean physically or metaphorically?
physically? Physically, where is the mask?
He's the mask that we used in the movie is in Mark Duplass's closet right now. And we have like two of them, I think. And we were lucky enough to buy maybe one or two right after we made the movie, but before it came out, while they still existed, because they don't exist anymore. You know, you can't find them anymore. And I've had people contact me trying to find them on the internet. And the person that designed it and made it is actually also a Rodney Dangerfield impersonator. And I contacted him right before we put out the movie, and we put a contract together, you know, and paid him some money for the design. But other than that, it's just this. I mean, like those, you know, and we hope to make more. Not we don't know what yet, whether it's a movie or what, but make more stuff in the Creep universe, and we have to use that mask. And so it's funny because it's this thing that it's very precious. It can't break or deteriorate too much because we'll be lost without it. So it's I think it's wrapped in an airtight bag in Mark Duplass's closet as we speak.
So I know who Mark and Jay Duplass are, but who is Brian Duplass? Who is Brian Duplass?
Brian Duplass is a typo that a writer put into a story at one point, which is very funny to me, because I think they might have meant Jay, but even if they said Jay, they're still wrong, because Jay is not in any of the movies. It's literally just me and Mark. And so maybe they thought they saw Bryce and they thought Brian, but it's a joke that comes up once a year or so for me. And it's very funny to me, at least.
So Creep 2 was released in 2017, and once again, it received great views. In what ways did your process for making Creep 2 differ from the first?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, because the first movie was such a like haphazard way into making a movie, we had a better idea of what we were going into with Creep 2. And so I think it was a little more fleshed out from a writing perspective before we went in and shot it, because we knew we were going to have another actor in the movie other than me, and we needed to show that person what was going to happen in the movie. And you know, so we had to sort of have a little more pre-production, I think, than we had for the first movie. We also knew that the person that we were going to be hiring for the second film, we wanted to be another writer and another director, and some as well as being an actor. And so Desiree Akhavan was someone who came up as being, really smart, really funny, great instincts as a filmmaker, but also like a really good actor at the same time. And so, she checked all those boxes, and she was down for kind of the weird way in which we make those movies, not really having a full script and improvising a lot and allowing the film to change and allowing for kind of surprise in a lot of these moments, and kind of going with that in the moment during production, which you can't do when you're making a big movie. Like, there's just too much planning involved. But I mean, the other difference was I think there was two of us on the first movie. It was just me and Mark, and then Chris Donlin, our editor, would come up and help when we were reshooting certain scenes and adding stuff. And then the second movie was then me, Mark, Chris, and then Carolyn Craddock, who was our producer, and Desiree. So there was 5 of us in a house as opposed to 2 or 3 of us in a house. And it was a shorter shoot. We had I think we shot 6 days for that movie. And the first movie was an initial production of 5 days, but then we went back and reshot stuff over the course of a year. That was maybe another 4 or 5 days of shooting. So all in all, it was a much neater, tighter production than the first one. And I think part of it was because we figured out so much of what made sense and what didn't make sense with the first movie, so that we had a much clearer goal with the second movie.
So you directed a Black comedy called Corporate Animal, starring an ensemble cast including Demi Moore and Ed Helms. So which actor had the no phone policy on set?
The no phone policy. Well, there wasn't really a policy, but Karan Soni, who's one of the leads in the movies, has a no phone policy for himself and would not check his phone on set. I don't remember if Demi did or not. I think Demi maybe also didn't really look at her phone a lot, but it was pretty much everyone else was on their phone because it was a lot of waiting around. But it was good. I mean, that's the type of thing where, like, I think it's kind of annoying, obviously, to have that as a distraction, and that's something to be seeping into your actors' heads. But also, I'm asking a lot of these people because we're working extremely long days, and we're also out in the middle of nowhere in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there's not a lot to do. And so, I do know directors, or I've heard of directors who have full-on no phone policy for anyone in the cast or crew. And I don't know. I think there might be a middle ground to ask for between the two, but I remember it was really Karan and Demi that didn't use their phone, and they were sort of like, two of the leads of the movie. So it was nice to have that discipline, there as an example for sure.
You directed Mark Duplass playing against type in creep films. Before playing the creepy psychopath, he was often cast as the lovable boyfriend. When are you going to cast Ed Helms as a creepy psychopath?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's a great idea because he's a really good actor, and I think he's capable of a lot more than we've seen from him. And I would love to do that. I think that's a wonderful idea, and I think it's something he'd be into as well, because I think he's had fun doing what he's doing, but he seems like, at least to me in our conversation, someone who's like down to explore and get weird for sure.
So I watched the creep films, Corporate Animals, There's Someone Inside Your House, and your comedy called The Overnight. Out of these, there are 3 movies showing 4 penises 5 times. Why are penises so funny?
I can't explain it. If I could explain it, I would. Uh, I'm grateful to have had the bravery of the actors that have shown them in their in the movies that I've done. I think, at least for me, they've always been welcome and surprising moments, you know. And I do think like part of it is uh you know, a comment almost on the sexism of our of our industry, and how, like, you know, women's naked bodies have been something that has been easily shown forever and ever, and then when men's bodies are shown, it's a different thing. But you know, I don't know. It's funny because I was about to say I wouldn't be gratuitous about it, and it's pretty gratuitous in in all of the examples you just mentioned.
Especially in the overnight.
Especially in the overnight. Well, it's like a plot point in the overnight,
Yeah.
you know. I don't know. I think it was just a way to like kind of be goofy about it, and I don't know, and have fun and do it in a way that I think, like, you know, I'm not going to put anything in a movie that doesn't come from character in some way, or speak to or inform a character. And it felt like in each of those examples you talked about, the male nudity is doing that, or at least I hope it's doing that, or the intention was to do that. And
I'm gonna throw a few questions at you, then kind of rapid fire. So our show is a friend to Fangoria magazine. You had a write up on a recent issue. What's been your relationship with Fangoria magazine over the years?
It's something I've always been a fan of. You know, ever since I was a kid, I read Fangoria, and so it was a big deal for me to actually have a film that was featured in it. They haven't really ever profiled or talked about the Creep movies. They gave us good reviews when the films came out, but have never really been profiled. I think part of that is because Fangoria does focus on a lot of the like gore and VFX gore that's in the movies, and you know, we had that and There's Someone Inside Your House, but didn't necessarily have that in the Creep movies. And so, you know, it made sense that it wasn't something that was like featured first and foremost in there. Maybe if we do another one, it'll be something that we tie in, but it was really fun to be in it, and be in it within the context of the article that came out. I think it was in the issue before last, where they're talking about sort of modern slasher films and how those films are roping in modern day themes.
So, do you prefer CGI or practical?
I, you know, always prefer practical as a viewer. I have had good experiences with it as a filmmaker, for sure. But I find the sweet spot in terms of getting it right is doing it practical as much as you can, and then using CGI or visual effects as sort of the sauce or the seasoning on top, you know. And I think that's what brings it home. And in There's Someone Inside Your House, that's the technique that we used. I would say all of the effects in that movie are probably 80% practical, 80 to 90, and then augmented with computers and VFX. There's just so much you can do now with computers, and it's really hard to tell the difference. It's getting harder to tell the difference. And so I think we're in a nice place where you can do both, get that visceral feeling that you get from practical effects, but then also, you know, hammer it home in a way that brings it over the edge in terms of making it feel real with computers.
So, do you prefer film or digital then?
So I came up during the time where digital filmmaking was completely the norm. You know, I've made some stuff in college, like experimental stuff using 16 millimeter, just trying it out. I mean, I love the look of 16. I love the look of Super 16. I love the look of 35 so much. But, you know, from a practical standpoint, I don't think I would have a career if I wasn't making my films digitally, period. Especially with the Creep movies and the way those are shot. And the camera is almost a character in those movies as well. And sort of like baked into the plot is that it's this old digital video camera. And so I would love to make something on film one day. I don't know if that necessarily makes sense. If I was, on any of the stuff that I have going on now, if a cinematographer came on board and was like, I have to shoot film, I would try to find a way to make that work. I think there are ways to make it work where it's not insanely expensive now. If that's something that I usually when I'm working with a cinematographer, I usually let them be my guide. I try to articulate what I want as much as possible, but they're the ones that need to execute that. So if they feel like that's something they can only get through film, what I'm asking for, what they're trying to do, I'm open to it and I appreciate it. But I also know it's the reason I have a career, and the reason I've been able to make as many movies as I've been able to make in a short period of time is partly because of digital filmmaking and especially the creep movies.
So do you prefer fast zombies or slow zombies?
I would say slow zombies for sure. I prefer slow anything to fast anything, and I think part of it is because I think you're able to that feels more like reality to me, and that feels more like tapping into a visceral real dread when you're seeing something happen in slow motion or even in real time, but slowly. Creeping dread is something I'm a fan of for sure.
So should vampires sparkle like in Twilight?
I think it would be very helpful if they did. I don't know if they would sparkle if I was going to make a vampire movie.
So this last question is a Sophie's choice. Two must die, so one may live. Bottle Rocket, Wet Hot American Summer, or Booty Call?
Oh my gosh. Two must die, so one may live?
Two must die, so one may live. Which one would live?
I mean, by the way, congratulations. You've really done a brilliant job of research with this.
Thank you.
It's really
crap
fun. Do you want to ask again? We can do over.
Yeah.
Take two.
Take two. This last question is a Sophie's choice. Two must die, so one may live. Bottle Rocket, Wet Hot American Summer, or Booty Call?
So first of all, congratulations. You've done your research. It's amazing actually to hear. So thank you for that. But this is an impossible choice that you're giving me right now. I think I have to go with what I'd actually want to watch now and what I'd have a fun time with right now. And I think all of them are special to me, but I probably would eliminate Booty Call. I feel like a lot of the humor of that is sort of the time. I probably would eliminate Bottle Rocket, even though I think it's a brilliant movie and was like incredibly inspiring to me to watch that movie as a 13-year-old and made me want to go make movies. And I would keep Wet Hot American Summer because that's a movie that I cry laughing every time I watch on a consistent basis. And I can't wait to show to my children when they're the right age. So I'm keeping Wet Hot American Summer.
All right. Thank you for sitting down with me. Is there anything you want to mention or ask me?
No, I just want to say congratulations on being such a great interviewer. And I really, feel like this was better than I would say 80 or 90% of the interviews that I've done before. I said that I wasn't going to do any more podcasts at one point. But I broke that rule for you, and I'm glad I did because this was really fun. And I wish you the best of luck, man. This has been great.
Thank you. How can people find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter at Patrick_Bryce, and I'm on Instagram at Patrick Bryce, and I post occasionally on both of those platforms.